the same as the party talked about by the Beastie Boys. And many of you have already expressed some disaffection for the current party system, right? So I want to explain it to you to maybe understand it a little bit better. And it doesn't mean you have to like it, okay? I'm just going to explain it to you so that you can say, that is the way things are because of this, right? In other words, what can we do about that? So why do we even have parties, right? Well, it's inevitable in a mass electric, kind of like a law of physics. E. Schatzsnyder is going to say that it's because of political parties that we even have democracy, right? They created modern democracy. They gathered people, they mobilized people, they got people to the polls, they got people voting. All right? And remember, Madison, of course, is incredibly worried about the effect that parties or factions would have. Right? And so he said, hey, the more competing we have until we get more interest groups competing, then that's better. But we end up with these two overarching parties in the United States, and we're going to talk about why in just a second. But a party is any political group that presents candidates at elections under a common label, all right? So, for example, we'll talk about interest groups on Wednesday, and you know, the World Wildlife Federation is not a party, right? The ACLU is not a party. These are interest groups, okay? The NRA, not a party, okay? So they have to present candidates at elections under a common label, and they're created for the purpose of winning elections, okay? The purpose is to win. We talked about campaigns a lot last week, right? And the week before. And then they're supposed to govern. That's the second thing they're organized to do. They're organized to govern. So, hey, we know we all kind of believe this sort of thing. Let's see if we can't put some laws in place that reflect those beliefs. Okay? They also serve sometimes as a gatekeeper. Now, there's a wasp in here, so watch out. Good. I might call someone about that. Okay. They also serve as a gatekeeper. We talked about that a little bit with, remember how the Democratic and Republican primaries are? Which party has better gatekeeping mechanisms right now? Democrats or Republicans? Democrats, right? Because Democrats have super delegates, and so it can't be overtaken by a populist group in the same way, okay? Is it gone? Is it on your water bottle? Oh, don't do that. Hold on, Eric's coming. I will replace your water bottle. Sorry about that. Okay. I'll bring you a new water bottle on Wednesday. Sorry.
Whoops.
Okay, so the Democratic Party has better gatekeeping right now because of those super delegates, right? The Republican Party does not have as good gatekeeping, right? It's more porous, but both American parties are very porous. Both main parties are very porous. Hey, you need to be wearing a mask. So, parties have important roles. They mobilize voters. Like I said, that's what Schatzsnyder is talking about. The fact that parties got people to the polls and voting. They mobilize voters. And, truthfully, they represent non-elites much better than interest groups do. Remember, why is that? Think back a couple lectures. What was Scotch Cole talking about? In her lost civic world? She talked about that there became this succession of the successful, right? And people started writing checks to causes that they care about. And so interest groups are much more likely to represent elite groups of people who are capable of that time, money, and education resource, whereas parties are much more mass-based, okay? You don't have to pay money to join. They also structure choices for the mass electorate, right? When we did the poll, and we talked about polling, and when we get to the presidency, we'll do it again. So at the time, Joe Biden was at about 42% popularity. He's back to 52%, right? That matters during the coming election. Structuring choices. Do we like, and for us, we the mass electorate, we structure choices that way. The president is a Democrat. I like him, therefore, I'm going to do what? Vote for Democrats or be excited about Democrats. Okay? The president is a Democrat. I don't like Democrats, therefore, I'm not going to vote for Democrats. Exactly. It's going to structure those choices because we do not do a very good job of investigating individual candidates. We just don't. Okay? It provides accountability. An eloquent yes or no. Do we like the jobs plan that's coming out of Congress and from the president? Yes, then we'll vote for it again. Okay? If we don't, we won't. And it organizes the government. And so right now, the House of Representatives is organized, and we'll talk about this more when we get to Congress, but we've talked about it a little bit. It's organized very hierarchically based upon who the majority party is. It's the Democrats. They're organizing their committees. They're organizing the leadership. In the Senate, it's 50-50, but who's the president of the Senate? You don't have to know this for like 3 weeks, but the vice president, right? And the vice president's a Democrat, so Democrats have the edge in the Senate, and so it's organized that way as well. They also knit together splintered interests, okay? When I was in college, I dated a guy from Phoenix, Arizona. His name was Jerry. The year was 1991-ish. And all Jerry actually cared about was the Grateful Dead and legalizing marijuana. Okay? This is all Jerry cared about. All right? And so the large political parties, whenever we talk about things like taxes and the role of government, did Jerry care? No. Jerry did not care.
Red flag.
But if one of those parties takes on this particular interest of Jerry's, legalizing it, right? And Jerry's like, I guess I'm here. And that means I'm going to adopt these other policy stances too. All right? So we see some knitted together, splintered interests that wouldn't necessarily go together. But they go together because, hey, I like this, and since the party that's really in favor of this thing, right? You remember the NRA? We've talked about that, right? So when we talk about gun control, you're like, I do not want that. No, to be fair. The NRA was the first for NRA gun control.
I don't like the NRA that much. I'm actually a narco-Catholic.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to use you as an example anyway. And so when we're talking about gun rights, the Second Amendment, right? The Republican Party is going to be a better fit in that way. And so if you choose that route, because that's the thing you care about, the thing you care about, then you're going to adopt these other policies as well as your own. You're going to knit together splintered interests. They're absolutely pivotal in American political history. They're the reason we have democracy the way that we have it. In other democracies, parties have dues-paying members. If you want to be a member of the Green Party, if you want to be a member of the, now I'm blanking here. The Social Conservative Party, if you want to be a member of the Democratic Socialist Party, whatever, you have to pay your dues. You want to be a member of Labor, pay. Okay? You want to be a member of the Conservatives or the Tories, pay. Political parties and leadership and organization are going to select, so at the top level, I'm paying dues, right? And then they're going to select people to run for offices. In this district, we're running this person, okay? In this district, we're running this person. For president or prime minister, we're running this person. For mayor, we're running this person. Okay? It's going to be selected top down, and not necessarily at a national level. It might be at a state level or a local level, but it is going to be from the party leadership. That's where that's going to come from. But in the United States, candidates are selected by primaries. They're organized by the parties, but the people choose. But more importantly is this third part. Candidates are self-selected for the most part. There's some recruitment, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, if people want to run, they run. Okay? Hey, I think I want to be mayor, so I'm going to run. I think I want to run for state legislature, so I run. This party label fits me best, so I'm going to run under this party. But we're self-selected. We do have a lot of recruitment by activist groups outside of parties. Parties not so much. And those activist groups are running those campaigns. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked about dark money. Right? But for the most part, the majority of candidates are self-selected. The two major parties get automatic ballot access everywhere, in every state. Democrats and Republicans have automatic ballot access. So that means they don't have to work hard to get that. That means you don't have to go around every election cycle and get enough signatures so that your party can be on the ballot. Or you don't have to meet a certain threshold of votes to get on the ballot. All other parties do. In Oklahoma, in other states, this is generally true as well, but there are some states with more open party rules. Oklahoma has one of the most restricted. But California would be the one that has the least restricted. Okay? Both parties are porous, they're subject to outside movements, and understand this, our candidates are not as qualified as they are in these other democracies. They don't know things about government necessarily or policy. Okay? We have much more unqualified candidates. It's more the idea of a citizen lawmaker. There's 3 ways to understand American parties. I always ask this as a multiple choice question on your exam, which is coming up in just 2 weeks. Okay? And I say, what are the 3 ways to understand American parties? What are the 3 ways that parties, we can think about parties? Something like that, right? Multiple choice question. And I say party organization, party in government, party in the electorate, and then I throw something else in there, and then I say, what? All of these except for D. Or I just say all of the above, or none of the above, right? Okay? So party organization, party in government, party in electorate. So let's talk about what those are. Party organization. It's organized at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. So that civic world we were talking about, which also was developed in that same way, right? Rotarians at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. Moose lodges at the local level, and the state level, and the federal level. Okay? Parties are organized the same way. And so state parties are often, a little different from the national party. They're a little different from the national party. Local parties may be a little different. But they're organized at each one of these levels, and ultimately their platform is created This is important because your workbook this week, you're looking at party platforms. The platform is created at the National Convention every 4 years. There's only one exception to that in recent history. In 2020, the Republican Party declined to create a new platform. They just used the 2016 platform again. That's literally the only time that has happened in 140 years. Okay? Party and government. This is the party that has been elected and is in office. So I voted for a Republican, okay, in Oklahoma. I expect that Republican in Oklahoma to do certain things. The Republican Party in Oklahoma, which is in power in the state legislature and in the governor's branch, right? This is the party in government. How government behaves, how government actors behave. The Democratic Party at the national level. Sometimes you hear people say, well, the Republican Party at the national level is too conservative, but I'm a Republican. I'm just more moderate than that. But my local level Republicans are more moderate. And you hear the same thing, Democratic Party at the national level, I think is too progressive. Okay? And so I prefer, but my local Democratic Party is more moderate, and I feel more comfortable with that, right? So you do hear that. It's not that that doesn't change, but your office holders may be more progressive or more moderate. For example, in the Democratic Party right now, you have Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Who is the more moderate of the two? Nancy Pelosi, right? There's no question about that, and she's the leadership. She's the leadership and leads the Democrats in the House of Representatives. So, the Republican Party is represented by party leaders. So, former President Trump, this is unusual for a former president to take so much leadership in a party. Again, this is an unusual thing, okay? It's typically if someone does not succeed as president, or if they have served their time as president, then they're going to kind of move to the side for new leaders. We're not seeing that in the Republican Party right now, though there are some challenges, certainly, to the Trump view of what the Republican Party should be. Liz Cheney probably being pretty vocal on that. Mitt Romney is another example of that. The Democratic, and Senator McConnell, that's Mitch McConnell, who would also be opposed to kind of a Trump-led Republican Party. He is the minority, but really kind of tied majority leader in the Senate, okay? Democratic Party, President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and then Chuck Schumer in the Senate, okay? Now, party in the electorate. This also looks different. This is you, maybe, if you register with the party. And it's me, right? And it's basically everybody who identifies with, or, so you register that way, or leans toward that party, right? So maybe you're a registered independent, but you kind of lean to the left, or you kind of lean to the right, okay? Then you would be classified as more of a Republican or more of a Democrat. And so the electorate is obviously going to be very diverse. We have kind of a party platform. We have the people who are elected who maybe diverge from that a little bit, so that's party in government, and then they govern. And then we have party in the electorate, which is even more diverse, right? Has different policy goals. Over time, we've had realignments. Okay? And this is particularly when a group of people moves from one party to another party. Okay? And so, from 1860, the same two major parties have contested U.S. elections. But that does not mean that their ideology has remained constant. It has not. there have been significant shifts. So, a major shift in power between the parties caused by a shift with a particular group or class of people, of voters. They've shifted their allegiance, okay? That's when a realignment happens. A critical election is often a signal of a change in ideological bent. It usually has to happen, 2-3 times before we really go, oh yeah, that was it, okay? Political scientists are really good at saying, oh yeah, that happened then, right? We're not so good at saying this is happening now, or this is going to happen in the future. We don't predict the future. We use probability, but we don't predict the future. But we can tell you what's happened, okay? So a critical election, the signal of a change. So we have some key realignments. 1800, okay, that's whenever basically the Federalists disappeared, okay? 1860, where we get the Democrats or Republicans. We have the Whigs who become with the Republican Party, still that conservative, but big government, but conservative in terms of taxes and business. And both parties are pretty small government, really, anyway. But the Republican Party, anti-slavery stance in 1860. And then in 1932, there's another one that happens in 1900, but you don't need to know about it, okay? In 1932, we have this really big shift. What happens in 1932? The Great Depression, right? And what you see is this weird coalition that forms with the Democratic Party, okay? The Democratic Party, solid South, okay? The South voted Democratic, period. That's what they voted, okay? I know it sounds weird to you, okay? The South voted Democratic all the time. The Democratic Party in 1932 expands its ideology in a couple of ways. One, it shifts from a states' rights party to a federal government power party. Okay, this is an important ideological shift. Shifting from states' rights to centralized government power. Okay? The second thing that they do is they talk about government being something that can solve problems. And so you have a lot of academics join in with the Democratic Party. Because this idea of, hey, Keynesian economics, how many of you taken economics? 12, okay. So Keynesian economics is basically says this, hey, look, over time, there are recessions, and we go out of recessions, and basically the economy goes like this, right? And Keynes says, if you inject money right here, and we'll talk more about this in about 2 months, okay? If you inject money right here, then you don't fall as far, and you recover more quickly, okay? And so at the time of the Great Depression, when John Maynard Keynes is saying these sort of things, and Roosevelt's on board, all these academics are on board too, so they also join with the Democratic Party to say, hey, look, there are things that government should be doing to make it better for the people, okay? And basically, the Republicans get left behind because they've always been kind of a more centralized than state power party. And they just kind of say, yeah, we're still kind of there. But the big difference is in regulation of business, right? Hoover says, hey, look, it'll right itself. This Great Depression will end. We don't need to do anything. And people say, yeah, we do. I'm standing in a bread line. And so they jump, right? So we're talking labor jumps. We're talking middle class jumps. We're talking, this is the first move of African Americans away from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And so we have this giant coalition. And, basically Roosevelt could do whatever he wanted because Congress was on board. Congress was on board. Now, from 1964 to 1994, we start realigning. But it's not all in one jump like it was in 1932. 1932, you can just look at it and go, oh, that's easy. Okay? In 1964, you don't quite see it. In 1964, you have someone break apart from the Democratic Party. Anyone? And run for president? In 1964? Huh? No, Reagan goes from being a Democrat to a Republican for different reasons. But he's a,
Who ran against LBJ?
what?
Who ran against LBJ?
Yeah, who was it? Huh? Barry Goldwater is the Republican, but who's the Democrat? He runs as a Southern Democrat. You know? Wallace. There we go. Okay? And he runs as a Southern Democrat and he wins Southern states. Okay? So this is one of the few elections where you go, okay, there's something happening here. Okay? He runs as a Southern Democrat. He wins some states, but LBJ wins the election overall. That New Deal coalition holds. But LBJ ushers in an era of the civil rights Democratic Party. Up until then, Democrats had been better for African Americans, so they had been voting because economically it was better. But in terms of policies, it wasn't great. Okay? Housing policies in particular were bad. Okay? We kind of, in terms of the way everybody did, with the exception of the Supreme Court, looked the other way, right? Both Republicans and Democrats looking the other way whenever it came to things like segregation, when it came to inequality, lack of access to ballots, etc. Okay, both parties, no question about it. Okay, but the Democrats in 1964 make a commitment to civil rights. And when they do that, this is why George Wallace runs, it breaks apart the solid South from the Democratic Party. It breaks apart the solid South. But it goes kind of slowly because people are used to being a thing, right? We talked about that a little bit. We talked about how we have tribes and how we have loyalty. The same sort of thing. My family's always been a Democrat. I'm still going to be a Democrat. Okay? So it goes pretty slowly. Also, there's absolutely no Southern Republican organization. I mean, there isn't a Republican Party you can join in the South. It just doesn't exist. And so you have more conservative Democrats and more progressive Democrats, but you have Democrats, right? This is going to start to change in 64, like I said, we see that. And then in 68, you start seeing the South vote Republican in national elections for the president, in other words. But they're still voting for Democrats at home because that's all there is. But with the moral majority in the 1970s, added to Reagan Democrats, right, where Reagan's going to grab some labor too based upon those moral principles. That's where we start bringing in, Ronald Reagan is going to bring morality into politics. This is really the first time that's going to happen, okay? Because you have people of both minds and on both parties, because we're talking about economics and things like that. But Ronald Reagan's going to bring that in. Ronald Reagan is also going to clearly claim the South. Because he's going to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Mississippi burning takes place. And he's going to run on three things. State power, lower taxes, and crushing the Soviet Union. Right? And he starts his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, with the idea of return to state power. And neither parties had been talking about this. This is significant, right? The states' rights idea had been gone since 1932. Nobody talked about it. Okay? So you start seeing more of that, and Newt Gingrich, who's from Georgia, says the problem is nobody's going to vote for Republicans in the South because they don't have any Republicans to vote for. And he single-handedly creates the local level Republican Party in the South. He does it. And it makes a difference in 1994. In 1994, you have the Republican Revolution, where the House of Representatives has a majority Republican for the first time since 1932. Think about that. So the Republican Revolution changes a lot of things. We'll talk about that when we get to Congress and the changes that happen there. But particularly, it changes this balance. Suddenly, the South, this big group, particular white Southerners, right, are now Republican. They're voting Republican at the local level, at the national level, and this is a change brought about, over time, civil rights. The Democrats moved towards civil rights and desegregation. Republicans add on morality and states' rights. Okay? I want you guys to think about this, because if I asked an essay question about this, I'd probably say something like, hey, is there a realignment going on right now too? What do you guys think? Any thoughts? Say yes. Okay, so we have Donald Trump is absolutely the head of the Republican Party, right? Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney do not like it, but it does not matter. Or Mitch McConnell does. But it does not matter. That's what's happening, right? And so that means the Republican Party is fundamentally changing ideologically. It's moving from a free market and free trade party to a protectionist party. This is something that certainly Republicans have never been. It is focusing, again, it's staying with the morality from Reagan, there's no question about that. But it's adding on some ideas that are more populist in nature. They're more populist in nature. What are some of those ideas? A lot of nativism, right? What does nativism mean? Anti-immigrant. Okay. We also certainly see some levels of racism, right? No denouncing of white supremacy, right? This has been agreed upon by both parties that this is something that happens until very recently. And anti-intellectualism. And we've seen this before too in the 1800s. Sorry we haven't seen all this before, we have, okay? But it's a pretty new thing historically in our history, right? It's pretty new for us, okay? It hasn't happened in 100-ish years. But know-nothings were a very big thing in the late 1800s. This idea it's better to rely on common sense or street smarts than it is on these academics or these experts. What do they know after their 12 years of school anyway? Pretty much nothing we can respect. Okay? Some of you are saying, I don't like either of those choices. I don't like this, right? Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell would certainly be with you. They're going to say, we don't like these choices. We don't want to be Democrats. Okay? But we don't really like what is going on with the Republican Party under Donald Trump either. And so some of you may be in that same boat. Some of you may say, nope, this is where I am, whether it's with the Democrats or with the Republican Party. But the question is will there be a third party emerge? Or a fourth or a fifth? Not with the rules we have in place. There are structural rules that keep us from having any more than two parties. So that question, why do we have a two-party system? Because of the rules of the game. We have this first past the post system, and it's winner take all. In other words, if we have three parties and someone gets 40% and someone gets 30% and someone else gets 29%, then 40% wins. We don't have a runoff. So third parties don't stand a chance because of that loyalty thing. Okay? Because it's not a majority situation. Now, some states are changing, like we have some runoffs in Louisiana. California has much more open ballot access. Maine is the first to really implement quite a big change in terms of ranked choice, and we'll talk about that. And state ballots are kind of a problem. So I'm going to give you a video, because I know that's what you want more than anything else in the world.
Attendance.
Oh, I'll take attendance right now and get this video ready.
It's live.
I'm not showing it before. Okay, here we go.
The royal family has a problem. This isn't just Cuba right now. These are the lines. Rulers of the jungle since time immemorial. There are protests over the monarchy's absolute power, and the citizens of the animal kingdom want a say in how they are governed. Bending to the pressure, Lion has abdicated his crown, and King is to be in elected office. To ensure a smooth transition, and because she is craftier than her husband, the Queen Lioness is remaining on the throne with the power to set the rules for all elections in her kingdom. She has declared that all citizens get one and only one vote, and that the candidate with the most votes wins the crown. This method of voting is most often called first past the post, awkwardly abbreviated as FPTP, or winner take all. The system is simple, fair, and logical, right? Actually, no. It's a terrible, terrible idea. Why? Well, to see the problems with first past the post, let's watch the first election unfold in the animal kingdom. It's an exciting time for the burgeoning democracy, and 7 hopeful candidates come forward to run and represent their parties. They put on their best campaigns, citizens head out to the polls, and the votes are counted. The results come in as follows. Turtle gets 9% of the vote, monkey gets 18, gorilla gets 19, owl gets 13, leopard gets 20, tiger gets 15, and snake gets 6. Under the rules of first past the post, leopard is crowned the winner, and she gets to rule for the length of her term. But take a look at the results, and you'll see the first problem with this system, minority rule. The vast majority of citizens, 80%, wanted someone else as king, but leopard still won. There were only 7 candidates in this race, but if you imagine if there had been 20, she might have only gotten 5% of the vote, but still been elected. This problem of minority rule is only the beginning. The second problem with first past the post is that, given enough time, it results in an inevitable, unavoidable two-party system. Why? To see, let's watch what happens over several election cycles. Leopard has had her term in office, and it's again election time in a young democracy. Only now, all the citizens of Animal Kingdom remember the results from last time. This information changes how they'll behave, particularly snake and turtle voters, who must face the reality that they backed unappealing extremist candidates who don't have a chance of winning. Turtle voters, who were unhappy under leopard rule, decide to back the candidate who has the best chance of winning, gorilla. Now, snake voters want to vote for tiger, who is the candidate they have the most in common with, but they're afraid to because leopard is running a negative campaign against her competitors. Snake voters, not liking the idea of gorilla rule, vote strategically for leopard. The final result looks like this, with leopard getting 26% of the vote and gorilla getting 28%, making him the new king. Snake and turtle, seeing their dismal results and knowing the cost of their campaigns, decide to drop out of future races. What started out as a 7-party system is now down to 5. Fast forward to the next election. Only 5 candidates run, and again the voters remember what happened last time. In this election, it's owl voters who recognize that their candidate cannot win. They are centrist voters and less ideological than the rest of the animal kingdom. As such, they don't really like gorilla or leopard. Both gorilla and leopard know this, so they each run negative campaigns to capitalize on the fears of the centrists. Owl voters split their vote and are mostly voting against the candidate they dislike rather than supporting the candidate they do like. After this election, gorilla gets 33% of the vote and leopard gets 34%, making her the winner. Owl, as did turtle and snake before her, drops out of the race. In the last election we'll look at, monkey and tiger voters are unhappy. They both really like the candidates they have supported, but they now have to compromise. Monkey voters agree with gorilla on few issues, but they really don't like leopard. And tiger voters agree with leopard on some issues, but they really don't like gorilla. They strategically abandon their preferred candidate out of fear of the one they disagree with the most becoming king. The final results are leopard 49% and gorilla 51%, with him being crowned king. Monkey and tiger are the last candidates to drop out, and now the animal kingdom is left with a two-party system. Because of the centrist and swayable owl voters, in future elections, leopard might take the crown, then gorilla wins it back, only to lose it to leopard again, but the two parties never change. The citizens of Animal Kingdom ended up with the system, not because they are lazy voters or because that's what they really wanted, but because the mathematics of how the system is set up. Inevitably, given enough time, all first-past-the-post systems trend towards two main parties. But the choices of the voters still hasn't changed since that first election. Only 2/5 of them wanted either leopard or gorilla as their first choice, and 3/5 of them wanted someone else as their first choice. It's this majority of the voters that becomes disinterested in the democratic process because they feel they have no meaningful way to express their real preferences. But it only gets worse from here. If the citizens of Animal Kingdom are divided into groups before they vote, they are susceptible to gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a bit tricky, but imagine a block of 10 homes, each with one voter inside. 3 are leopard voters, 3 are gorilla voters, and 4 are owl voters. If they're divided up into groups before they vote, whoever decides where the lines are drawn has enormous influence over who wins the election. For example, if you group the 3 leopard voters with the 2 owl voters, and do the same with the 3 gorilla voters, you can eliminate owl from the election, even though owl voters have the largest minority and would win under a straight first-past-the-post vote. If the leopard or gorilla parties are in charge when the voting boundaries are drawn, they have enormous incentive to carve out safe seats for themselves. But more on gerrymandering in another video. Bah, I hear you say, vote third party and change the system. This brings us to the final and possibly worst problem of first-past-the-post, the spoiler effect. Imagine now that it's been years and years of gorilla or leopard rule. Tiger decides it's time to enter the race. He thinks that the voters are tired of the status quo and he has a shot at winning. He sets up his campaign office, gets a surprising amount of gold and donations, and gets on the Animal News Network to debate with the main candidates. Election night comes around, but alas, Tiger gets only 15% of the vote, mostly from leopard voters who are closest to him on the political spectrum. Gorilla easily beats leopard and gets to be king. This is the first-past-the-post system at its worst. The better a third-party candidate does, the more it hurts its own voters by guaranteeing a loss for the party they most agree with and a win for the party they most disagree with. And don't forget, Gorilla is no fool. He knows how the system works. Where do you think some of those gold donations came from? Meanwhile, the Queen Lioness is displeased. She's been observing the elections and sees that the system is bad for her subjects. And she's been thinking, what makes a good voting system? Well, you should be able to vote for the candidate who you like the most without worrying. More choice in representatives is better, the system shouldn't be susceptible to gerrymandering, and it should be open to new political parties. Luckily for the Queen, there are several different voting systems to choose from, including the alternative vote, but that will have to be discussed in detail at another time. Thank you very much for watching.
Okay, so I'm gonna have a poll for you really quickly. What would you prefer as far as a voting system? We have, keep it as it is, so first past the post, ranked choice voting. That's where you rank your first choice, and then if they don't win, it goes to what your second choice is, or third choice. Runoffs until a majority, or then at-large districts with the party list. So for example, in Oklahoma, there are 5 districts. You have an at-large 5, and you would vote for, the Democrats or Republicans. In Oklahoma, it'd probably end up like this. There would be 2 Republicans, a Libertarian, and 2 Democrats, right? That's probably how it would end up. But as it is right now, how many Republicans and how many Democrats? 5 Republicans, 0 Democrats. Gerrymandering. We'll talk about that later. Over. Go in the back.
Did you write it down on the,
Yeah, all the devices, my phone doesn't somehow.
write your name down right here.